This week, the worm's dinner consists mostly of root crops. Root crop peelings present a particular issue, I think, for small worm bins. They're tough and they don't easily break down. So to help the process along, if I'm ever adding root crop peelings to the worm bin, or any small worm bin, I tend to break them down as small as I possibly can, including using the freeze, thaw and squeeze method. So what I'm going to do this week is I'm going to take roughly equal amounts of potato, parsnip, swede and carrot peelings, and I'm going to halve the amount, dry blend, therefore maximising the surface area, one half, and I'm going to freeze, thaw and squeeze out as much liquid as I can first, the other half, and then blend that. And then the idea is to add this to the worm bin, and we can just have a look and see how the worms get on with it and how quickly it will disappear in the bin. If you've ever thrown a potato peel with an eye on it into a cold composting process bin, which a worm bin is, it's a cold composting process that goes on, not a hot. You won't have an issue in a large bin with a hot composting process, but in small bins where the heat, it just isn't generated. You've probably had the experience of coming back to it at some stage and finding that the potato peel had actually sprouted. So these root crop peelings will sit in the worm bin forever if you don't help the process along. So by blending it, you don't need to blend, you can chop up as small as you can. You're increasing the surface area, therefore giving the bacteria greater area to work on, therefore the stuff breaks down much quicker and therefore it's more readily available with the bacteria for the worms, because remember, the worms are after the bacteria more so than the food. So really what they're after is the bacteria, not your food scraps, but it's just a happy accident for us that the food scraps get slurped in the process and passed out the other end as worm casts. So that's the working tray now, the top tray. It's looking good. It's definitely redeemed itself. So the plan is I'm going to make two little feeding stations. I'm going to put one on the right, one on the left. The one on the right will be raw, so we'll remember that when we come back to it. Right for raw. So that will be the blended dry raw stuff, and the left feeding station will have the frozen, thawed and squeezed blended scraps. And my prediction at this stage is both of those feeding stations are going to do very well, but when we come back and look at this in about a week's time, the scraps on the left that's the frozen and thawed scraps, they'll be pretty much all gone. And that's because we're helping the worms and we're helping the bacteria. So the worms aren't having to wait as long for the bacteria to populate that. We've already done a lot of the work by breaking down the cell structure in the freezing process for the bacteria. So they're going to dive in there with the enzymes and start sucking all the nutrients that they need out of the scraps. And then the worms are going to come along and hoover everything up. So I'm just going to cover up the scraps. That's the blended dry on the right and the frozen on the left. We'll come back in about a week and see how they get on. So this is the 13th of March. We're now at the 19th of March, yesterday. And let's have a look. Still masses of springtails in this bin, but it's outside and it's not a problem. And that's really just a function of how moist the bin is. So if I take you in closer there, you can see that the dry blended root crop scraps is actually heaving with worms. But they're all very active in that little section. Feeding very well there. They're good, healthy looking worms. I'm really pleased with how quickly this worm bin has turned around from the state it was in a few weeks ago. But now if we swing over to the left hand side, there's still a fair amount of food scraps left there, but lots of worms in the middle of it working away, so that's good. But if we just swing over to the left and take a look at what's going on there, it's noticeable straight away that there's way less foodstuff for those worms. There's still a lot of worms working that little patch, but in comparison to the amount of food scrap that's left, there's really only a pinch of. There was about two good fistfuls of scraps added both sides, and there's really only a pinch of material left on the out of the frozen scraps, whereas I'd say there's a good handful left of the dry blended material. So in 6 days, about half the quantity of the dry blended material has been consumed, and I would say definitely more than 3/4 of the frozen dry material has gone. So that was just a quick look at 2 different approaches to feeding a difficult food stock to the worm bin, namely root crops. Both worked very well. So both would, if you had a lot of root crop scraps to feed your bin and you took the approach of making the scraps as small as possible, wouldn't present a problem. If you just throw them in as they are, it would present a problem, I think. But definitely, of the 2, freezing and thawing was the best, in the sense that it was processed quicker. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, please drop me a like, comment, share, subscribe. If you have any questions, be sure to ask in the comment section and I'll always be happy to answer them. But as always, thanks for watching. Bye for now.